At my birthday dinner, I received a strange gift. "You'll die working in construction. I'll be with your friend. He's a millionaire," my wife said. Everyone laughed at me, but as they walked out of the restaurant, I made a call to the bank. The next day, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." My name is Felix, and at 59 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. Nothing could have prepared me for what happened on my birthday, the night my wife decided to destroy me in front of everyone I cared about. The restaurant Sandra chose was upscale, the kind of place where construction workers like me felt out of place. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the waiters wore bow ties that probably cost more than my work boots. I should have known something was off when she insisted on Romano's instead of our usual family diner, but I figured she wanted to make my 59th birthday special. The table was set for 12 people. Sandra sat across from me, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a dress I didn't recognize. Must have cost a fortune. Her sister Margaret was there with her husband, along with Sandra's parents, my daughter Emma from my first marriage, and several neighbors. At the head of the table sat Marcus Wellington, Sandra's so-called friend, the guy who owned 3 luxury car dealerships around town. I noticed how Sandra kept glancing at Marcus throughout dinner, how she laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. My stomach tightened, but I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, we had been married for 8 years. She knew I worked hard to provide for our family, even if it meant coming home covered in dust and cement every night. The conversation flowed around real estate prices and vacation plans to Europe. I mostly listened, occasionally nodding when someone asked about my construction projects. These people had never shown much interest in my work before, and tonight was no different. Then Sandra stood up, tapping her wine glass with her knife. The crystal made a delicate chiming sound that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. Everyone turned to look at her, expecting a birthday toast. "I have an announcement to make," she said, her voice carrying across our table and to the neighboring ones. My heart started beating faster. Something in her tone felt wrong, predatory. She looked directly at me, and for a moment I saw something cold in her eyes that I had never noticed before. "Felix, darling, I've been thinking about our future together." I forced a smile, my hands gripping the edge of the white tablecloth. "Okay, honey, what's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, as if she was about to deliver great news. "I've decided that I can't spend the rest of my life watching you slowly kill yourself in construction. You're going to die working with your hands covered in dirt, and frankly, I deserve better." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I felt my face flush hot, then cold. Around the table, people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Emma's mouth fell open. Margaret looked down at her plate, suddenly fascinated by her salmon. But Sandra wasn't finished. She walked around the table and placed her hand on Marcus's shoulder. "So I've decided to be with someone who can actually provide the life I want. Marcus has asked me to move in with him, and I've said yes." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Marcus didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. He just sat there with a smug smile, his manicured hands folded on the table. Then the laughter started. First, Margaret giggled nervously, then Sandra's parents joined in, as if this was all some elaborate joke. Soon half the table was laughing, and Sandra was beaming like she had just won the lottery. "Oh, Felix," Sandra's mother said, dabbing her eyes with her napkin. "You should see your face. Did you really think someone like Sandra would stay with a construction worker forever?" My daughter Emma stared at me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. I had raised her since she was 7 after her mother died, and Sandra had been the only mother figure she had known for 8 years, but now she just looked at me like I was a stranger who had disappointed her. "Dad," Emma said quietly, "maybe Sandra has a point. You're not getting any younger, and this job is really hard on your body." I felt something break inside me then. Not just my heart, but something deeper. The last thread of connection I had to the people I thought were my family. I looked around the table one more time, memorizing their faces, the way they looked at me with such casual cruelty. Marcus finally spoke, his voice smooth and confident. "Felix, no hard feelings, right? It's just business. Sandra deserves to be with someone who can take care of her properly." I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. My work clothes suddenly felt heavy and dirty compared to everyone else's fancy outfits. I pulled out my wallet and placed enough cash on the table to cover my portion of the dinner, even though I hadn't finished eating. "Happy birthday to me," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the restaurant's soft music. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Sandra call out behind me, "Don't wait up, Felix. I'll be at Marcus's tonight." This triggered another round of laughter from the table. I made it to the parking lot before my hands started shaking. I sat in my old pickup truck, the same one I had driven for 10 years, and stared at the restaurant through the windshield. I could see them inside, still laughing, probably toasting my humiliation. That's when I pulled out my phone and made the call that would change everything. The number I dialed was one I hadn't used in months, but I knew it by heart. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Peterson and Associates, this is James." "James, it's Felix Morrison. I need to see you first thing Monday morning." "Felix, it's been a while. What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath, watching Sandra through the restaurant window as she leaned into Marcus, playing the part of the devoted new girlfriend. "I need to discuss some changes to my holdings." "Big changes." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure, Felix? You've been very clear about keeping everything quiet for years." I started the engine, the old truck rumbling to life. "I'm sure, James. It's time people knew exactly who they're dealing with." As I drove away from Romano's, leaving behind the laughter and the cruelty, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not anger, not sadness, but a strange sense of clarity. For 8 years I had played the role of the simple construction worker, letting Sandra and everyone else believe I was just a man with dirty hands and simple dreams. Tomorrow they were going to learn the truth about Felix Morrison. And I had a feeling none of them were going to be laughing anymore. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. I sat in my truck outside Peterson and Associates, a modest office building downtown that most people drove past without a second glance. James Peterson wasn't the flashy type of attorney who advertised on billboards. He was the kind of lawyer wealthy people used when they wanted to keep their business private. I had showered and put on my best clothes, a simple navy suit I kept for special occasions. Even so, I felt underdressed compared to the business people walking in and out of the building. Old habits die hard, I suppose. Sandra hadn't come home the night before. I had spent the weekend alone in our house, a modest 3-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood. She probably assumed I was sulking, licking my wounds like a beaten dog. She had no idea what was really happening. James greeted me in his office with a firm handshake and genuine concern in his eyes. He was a thin man in his 60s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. We had known each other for almost 20 years, ever since I had first made my unusual request. "Felix, you look tired," he said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his desk. "I've been thinking about your call all weekend. Are you absolutely certain you want to do this?" I nodded, settling into the chair, more certain than I've ever been about anything. James opened a thick file folder and spread several documents across his desk. Even upside down, I could see the numbers that represented my real life, the one Sandra knew nothing about. "Let's review your current position," James said, adjusting his glasses. "Morrison Holdings owns 17 commercial properties throughout the tri-state area, including the shopping center on 5th Street and the office complex downtown. Current market value is approximately $12.3 million. I listened as he continued, the numbers washing over me like a familiar song. My construction business was just the tip of the iceberg, the part people could see. For the past 25 years, every paycheck had been carefully invested, every opportunity seized with quiet determination. Your stock portfolio is currently valued at $8.7 million, mostly in index funds and blue-chip stocks. Very conservative, very steady growth. And then there's the real estate development company you own through the LLC, which has been turning a profit for the past 8 years. What's the total? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Including liquid assets and the value of Morrison Construction itself, you're looking at approximately $24.8 million. The number hung in the air between us. $24.8 million. I had never said it out loud to anyone except James. For years, I had lived like a man who made $60,000 a year because that's what people expected from a construction worker. I drove an old truck, shopped at discount stores, and never took expensive vacations. "Sandra has no idea about any of this?" James asked, though he already knew the answer. I shook my head. "She thinks I'm just another blue-collar guy struggling to make ends meet. When we got married, I was very careful to keep the businesses separate. She signed a prenup without even reading it, said she didn't care about money as long as we loved each other." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "And your daughter?" "Emma doesn't know either. I've been putting money aside for her education and future, but she thinks it's coming from my construction salary." I paused, remembering her embarrassed face at the restaurant. Maybe it's time she learned some things about assumptions and character. James leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "Felix, what exactly do you want to do here? We can protect your assets in the divorce, that's straightforward, but I sense you have something more in mind." I had spent the entire weekend thinking about this moment. I want to withdraw all financial support from anyone who was at that table Friday night. Sandra's been living off my money for years without knowing it. The credit card she uses, the house payments, even her car loan, it all ultimately comes from Morrison Holdings through various channels. That's within your rights, but it will cause immediate hardship for her. Good, I said, and I meant it. I also want to file for divorce immediately. No negotiation, no attempt at reconciliation. She made her choice very publicly. James made notes on a legal pad. What about Marcus Wellington? Have you looked into his financial situation? I've been curious about that myself. Sandra seems to think he's wealthy because he owns car dealerships. James smiled slightly and pulled another folder from his desk drawer. I took the liberty of running a preliminary check on Mr. Wellington over the weekend. Let's just say his public image and his private reality are very different things. He slid a document across the desk. As I read, my eyebrows raised higher and higher. Marcus Wellington was leveraged to the hilt. His 3 dealerships were heavily mortgaged, and he owed substantial money to multiple creditors. His flashy lifestyle was built on credit and loans that were becoming increasingly difficult to service. He's been looking for investors for months, James continued. Word in certain circles is that he needs a significant cash infusion, or he's going to lose everything within the year. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. So his interest in Sandra might not be purely romantic. I doubt Marcus Wellington does anything purely for romance. He's a businessman in trouble, and Sandra appeared to be married to someone he assumed had money. We spent the next 2 hours going over the details. James would file the divorce papers by the end of the week. All the financial support that had been quietly flowing to Sandra would stop immediately. The credit cards would be canceled, the house payments would cease, and her car would be repossessed within 30 days. As I prepared to leave, James asked one final question. Felix, are you prepared for the fallout? When Sandra realizes what she's lost, she's going to be desperate. And when Marcus figures out you're not the easy mark he thought you were, he might become unpredictable. I stood up and shook his hand. James, I've spent 8 years pretending to be someone I'm not, for people who never respected me anyway. I'm tired of being invisible. That afternoon, I drove to the bank where I kept my primary business accounts. The manager, a woman named Carol, who had handled my investments for over a decade, greeted me with surprise. Felix, this is unexpected. You usually handle everything through James's office. I sat down across from her polished desk, feeling more comfortable here than I had at the restaurant Friday night. I need to make some changes, Carol, significant ones. We spent an hour restructuring my accounts, ensuring that Sandra would have no access to any funds after the divorce proceedings began. I also instructed Carol to liquidate some investments to ensure I had enough liquid cash for whatever came next. As I was leaving the bank, my phone rang. Sandra's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a moment, then answered, Felix? Where are you? I came by the house to pick up some things and my credit card was declined at the store. There must be some mistake. Her voice was annoyed, not concerned. She still had no idea what was coming. There's no mistake, Sandra. I'm downtown taking care of some business. Well, fix it. I'm embarrassed. The cashier acted like I was some kind of deadbeat. I looked up at the bank building behind me, thinking about the conversation I had just had with Carol. I'll look into it, I said calmly. You'd better. Marcus and I are having dinner with some of his business associates tonight, and I need to buy a new dress. Don't make me look foolish. The line went dead. She had hung up without saying goodbye, without asking how I was doing, without showing even a hint of remorse for what she had done to me Friday night. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, watching people hurry past on their way to important meetings and crucial deadlines. For years, I had felt like I was watching life from the outside, playing a role that grew more uncomfortable each day. But not anymore. Sandra wanted to be with a successful businessman. She was about to learn what a real businessman looked like when he stopped pretending to be something he wasn't. I climbed back into my truck and drove home, knowing it would be one of the last times I would call that house home. Tomorrow, Sandra's new reality would begin to unfold, and I suspected it wouldn't be anything like what she had imagined when she stood up at Romano's and destroyed our marriage in front of everyone we knew. The game had changed, and it was my turn to play. The divorce papers were served on Wednesday morning while Sandra was having coffee with her sister Margaret. I wasn't there to see it happen, but Margaret called me within the hour, her voice shrill with indignation. Felix Morrison, what is wrong with you? Sandra is devastated. How could you be so vindictive? I was standing in the office of my construction site, watching my crew pour foundation for a new medical building. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was literally building something while my marriage crumbled, but I had learned long ago that life rarely paused for personal drama. Margaret, Sandra made her feelings very clear on Friday night. I'm simply giving her what she wants. But divorce papers? Without even trying to work things out? I almost laughed. She announced in front of 12 people that she was leaving me for another man. What exactly is there to work out? Margaret sputtered for a moment before hanging up. An hour later, Sandra herself called, and this time her voice was different. Not angry, but confused and maybe a little frightened. Felix, we need to talk. This whole thing has gotten out of hand. I'm listening. I mean in person. Can you come home? I'm here packing some things, but we should discuss this like adults. I told my foreman I'd be back in an hour and drove to the house. Sandra's car was in the driveway, along with a silver BMW I recognized as Marcus's. Interesting that he had come along for this conversation. I found them both in the living room. Sandra looked tired, her perfect makeup smudged around her eyes. Marcus sat on my couch like he owned the place, but something was different about his demeanor. The smugness from Friday night had been replaced by something more calculating. Felix, Sandra began, I think I may have been hasty on Friday. Sometimes when people are frustrated, they say things they don't mean. I remained standing, keeping my distance from both of them. Which part didn't you mean? The part about me dying in construction, or the part about moving in with Marcus? She glanced at Marcus before answering. Maybe we could try counseling. Work through our problems. Our problems? I raised an eyebrow. Sandra, you humiliated me in public and announced you were leaving me for another man. Those aren't problems. Those are choices. Marcus cleared his throat and leaned forward. Felix, maybe we got off on the wrong foot Friday night. Sandra's told me a lot about you over the years. You're a hard worker, a decent man. I respect that. This was new. Friday night he had treated me like dirt beneath his shoe. Now he was showing respect. Something had changed, and I was pretty sure I knew what it was. That's very kind of you to say, Marcus. In fact, Marcus continued, I've been thinking. A man in my position is always looking for solid investment opportunities. Construction is a good business, especially with the right backing. Maybe you and I could explore some possibilities. There it was. Somehow Marcus had gotten wind of the fact that I might be worth more than I appeared. But how much did he know? Sandra brightened immediately. See? Marcus thinks you have potential, Felix. Maybe you could expand your business, hire more people, make more money. I studied both of their faces carefully. Sandra still had no idea about my real financial situation, but Marcus was fishing. Someone had told him something, or he had done some digging after Friday night's dinner. What kind of investment are you thinking about, Marcus? His eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of a salesman smelling a deal. Well, I've been looking into real estate development. There's a lot of money to be made if you know what you're doing. I have some connections. Some opportunities that could be very profitable for the right partner. Real estate development, I repeated slowly. That's interesting. What makes you think I'd be interested in that field? A man with your skills, your knowledge of construction costs and timelines, you'd be a natural. Of course, it takes capital to get started, but I'm sure a successful contractor like yourself has put some money aside over the years. Sandra was nodding eagerly. Felix has always been careful with money. Haven't you, honey? The endearment sounded forced, desperate. I could see the wheels turning in her head. If Marcus could help me make more money, maybe she wouldn't have to choose between us after all. How much capital are we talking about? I asked. Marcus leaned back, trying to look casual. Well, that depends on the project. But I'd say a serious investor would want to start with at least $500,000, maybe more. Do you think you could raise that kind of money? $500,000. He was testing me, trying to figure out how deep my pockets really were. I made a decision that would change everything. Marcus, can you excuse Sandra and me for a moment? I'd like to speak with my wife privately. He looked annoyed but stood up. Of course. I'll wait outside. After he left, Sandra turned to me with hope in her eyes. Felix, this could be exactly what we need. A fresh start, a chance to build something better together. I sat down across from her, choosing my words carefully. Sandra, before we talk about fresh starts, I need you to understand something. Friday night, when you announced you were leaving me, you said I was going to die working in construction. Do you remember that? She flinched. I was upset. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. You also said Marcus could provide the life you wanted, the life I couldn't give you. But if you could make more money, if we could live better. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document James had prepared for me. It was a summary of my net worth, printed on official letterhead. I handed it to her without saying a word. Sandra unfolded the paper and began reading. I watched her face change as the numbers sank in. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She read it again, her hands starting to shake. This says, she whispered, this says you're worth almost $25 million. That's correct. She looked up at me, her face pale. Felix, this has to be a mistake. We live in a modest house, you drive an old truck, we shop at regular stores. Because that's the life I chose to live. The life I thought you were happy with. But why didn't you tell me? All these years, why did you let me think we were struggling? I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm. Sandra, you fell in love with a construction worker. At least I thought you did. I wanted to make sure you loved me for who I was, not what I had. She stared at the paper again, her breathing becoming shallow. $25 million, she repeated. And Marcus doesn't know about this? He suspects I have some money, but he has no idea how much. That's why he's suddenly interested in being my business partner. Sandra's face went through a series of emotions: shock, confusion, anger, and finally calculation. I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to fix this situation. Felix, we can work this out. I made a terrible mistake Friday night, but now I understand. We can be happy together, really happy. With this kind of money, we could travel, buy a bigger house, live the life I always dreamed of. I stood up slowly. Sandra, you had that life. You could have had anything you wanted. All you had to do was treat me with respect. But I didn't know. And that's exactly the problem. You didn't respect me when you thought I was poor. So why should I believe you respect me now that you know I'm not? I took the document back from her trembling hands. Marcus is waiting outside. You should probably tell him the business opportunity he's looking for doesn't exist. Felix, please, don't do this. We can start over. But I was already walking toward the door. As I opened it, I found Marcus standing on the front porch, trying to look like he hadn't been listening at the window. Marcus, I said pleasantly, Sandra has something to tell you about my investment potential. His face fell as he looked past me to Sandra, who was still sitting in the living room looking stunned. Whatever he had hoped to gain from this conversation, it clearly wasn't going the way he had planned. I walked to my truck, leaving them both standing there trying to figure out what had just happened. As I drove away, I called James on my cell phone. James, it's Felix. They took the bait. Marcus thinks I have money, but he doesn't know how much. Sandra just found out everything. How did she react? I thought about the look on her face when she realized what she had thrown away. About like you'd expect. She wants to reconcile now. And Marcus? He's about to have a very interesting conversation with my soon-to-be ex-wife. I have a feeling he's not going to like what he learns. As I drove back to the construction site, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense that justice was finally beginning to balance the scales. Sandra wanted a wealthy man. She was about to discover that she had been married to one all along, but the real revelations were just beginning. The phone calls started that same evening. First Sandra, then Marcus, then Sandra again. I let them all go to voicemail while I sat in my kitchen eating a simple dinner of grilled chicken and vegetables. For the first time in weeks, I actually tasted my food. The first message was from Sandra, her voice thick with tears. Felix, please call me back. We need to talk about this properly. I know I hurt you, but I love you. I've always loved you. Please don't throw away 8 years of marriage over one stupid mistake. The second was from Marcus, and his tone was completely different from the afternoon. Gone was the friendly businessman trying to make a deal. This Marcus sounded desperate and angry. Felix, I don't know what game you're playing, but Sandra told me about your supposed wealth. If you think I'm going to let you humiliate me the way you did her, you're mistaken. I have friends in this town, influence. Don't push me. The third message was Sandra again, but this time she sounded different, calculating. Felix, I've been thinking about our situation and I realize you're probably angry about Friday night. You have every right to be. But I also know you're a smart businessman and smart businessmen don't make emotional decisions. Call me. We can work this out in a way that benefits both of us. I deleted all 3 messages without calling back. The next morning, I was in James's office again, but this time we weren't alone. Sitting across from James's desk was a man I recognized but had never met personally, Marcus Wellington's banker, Richard Hoffman. He looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his tie and avoiding eye contact. Richard came to see me yesterday afternoon, James explained. It seems Mr. Wellington has been making some very interesting inquiries about your financial situation. Richard cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Morrison, I want to be clear that I haven't disclosed any confidential information about your accounts. But Mr. Wellington has been very persistent in his questions about your creditworthiness. What kind of questions? He wanted to know if you would qualify for a large business loan, what kind of collateral you might have, whether you had any significant assets. He claimed he was considering you for a partnership opportunity. James and I exchanged glances. And what did you tell him? I told him that I couldn't discuss any client's financial information without their permission, but he was very insistent. He said it was a time-sensitive opportunity and that he needed to know if you were serious about investing. Investing in what? Richard pulled out a folder and handed it to me. He mentioned something about a real estate development project, a shopping complex on the east side of town. He said he needed a partner who could provide immediate capital. I opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. It was indeed a proposal for a shopping center, but the numbers didn't add up. The projected costs were inflated, the timeline was unrealistic, and the expected returns were wildly optimistic. "Richard," I said slowly, "have you seen Marcus's personal financial statements recently?" He nodded grimly. "That's actually why I came to see James. Mr. Wellington is in serious trouble. His dealerships are over-leveraged. He owes money to multiple creditors, and he's been using one line of credit to pay another for months. If he doesn't find significant capital soon, he's going to lose everything." The picture was becoming clearer. Marcus hadn't been interested in Sandra romantically. He had been interested in me financially. Sandra was just the means to an end. "There's something else," Richard continued. "Yesterday afternoon, after your wife spoke with him, Marcus came to my office demanding to know the exact details of your net worth. When I refused, he became quite agitated. He said he had been led to believe you were wealthy, and he needed to verify that information for a business deal." "What did you tell him?" I told him the same thing I always tell people who ask about our clients' private information. Nothing. After Richard left, James and I sat in silence for a few minutes processing what we had learned. "So Marcus targeted Sandra because he thought she was married to money," James said finally. "When that didn't work out the way he planned, he tried to approach you directly, and now he's desperate because his whole scheme is falling apart." My phone rang. Sandra's name appeared on the screen. This time I answered. "Hello, Sandra." "Felix, thank God, where are you? Marcus is acting very strange, and I'm scared." "What do you mean strange?" "He's been asking me all these questions about your money, about how much you really have, about whether you would invest in his business. When I told him I didn't know the details, he got angry. Really angry." I could hear the fear in her voice, and despite everything she had done to me, I felt a pang of concern. "Where are you now?" "I'm at Margaret's house. Marcus dropped me off here this morning and said he had some business to take care of. He took my car keys and my credit cards. He said he needed to make sure I didn't do anything stupid." The situation was escalating faster than I had anticipated. Marcus wasn't just desperate, he was becoming dangerous. "Sandra, listen to me carefully. Stay at Margaret's house. Don't go anywhere with Marcus. Don't give him any more information about our finances, and if he contacts you, call me immediately." "Felix, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought Marcus was successful, that he could give me the life I wanted. I didn't know he was using me to get to you. We'll sort this out later. Right now, just stay safe." After I hung up, I called James back. "We have a problem. Marcus is becoming aggressive and Sandra is scared. Do you think she's in real danger?" "I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances. Can you contact the police, let them know about the situation? I'll make some calls. In the meantime, you should be careful too. Desperate men do desperate things." That afternoon, I was supervising the installation of windows at the medical building when my foreman, Tom, approached me with a concerned expression. "Felix, there's a guy in a BMW who's been sitting in the parking lot for the past hour just watching the site. You know anything about that?" I looked across the street and recognized Marcus's car immediately. He was sitting behind the wheel staring at our work site. When he saw me looking at him, he started the engine and drove away. An hour later, Emma called. My daughter's voice was shaky and confused. "Dad, can you come over? There's a man here who says he's a friend of Sandra's and he's asking some really weird questions about you." My blood ran cold. "Emma, where exactly are you?" "I'm at my apartment. This guy, Marcus, he says Sandra sent him to talk to me about some family business. But Dad, he's acting really strange. He keeps asking about your work, about whether you have money saved up, about what kind of investments you might have." "Emma, listen to me very carefully. Do not give him any information about anything. Tell him you need to go to work or school or anywhere else and get out of there right now." "Dad, you're scaring me. I'm on my way. If he tries to stop you from leaving, call 911 immediately." I left the construction site and drove to Emma's apartment as fast as I could without breaking every traffic law in the state. When I arrived, Marcus's BMW was parked outside her building. I called the police from my truck before going inside. I found Marcus in Emma's living room, sitting on her couch like he belonged there. Emma was standing by the kitchen, her arms crossed, looking uncomfortable and frightened. "Felix," Marcus stood up with a forced smile. "I was just getting to know your daughter, lovely girl, very smart." "Get out," I said quietly. "Now there's no need to be hostile. I was just explaining to Emma how successful businessmen often have to make difficult decisions about family relationships." Emma looked from Marcus to me, confusion written all over her face. "Dad, what's going on? This man says Sandra is worried about you, that you're having some kind of breakdown. Emma, go wait in your bedroom. I need to have a conversation with Mr. Wellington. After Emma left the room, I turned to Marcus. Up close, I could see the desperation in his eyes, the telltale signs of a man who was cornered and running out of options. What do you want, Marcus? I want what we discussed yesterday, a partnership. You have money, I have opportunities. We can both benefit. I'm not interested in your opportunities. His friendly mask slipped completely. You don't understand, Felix. I need this deal. I need it now. If you don't help me, I'm going to lose everything. That's not my problem. Maybe not, but it's going to become your problem if you don't cooperate. You see, I know things about you now, about your money, about your business dealings. If something were to happen to those businesses, if certain information were to reach the wrong people, you could lose everything too. I felt a cold anger settle over me. Are you threatening me, Marcus? I'm explaining reality to you. We can do this the easy way or we can do it the hard way, but either way, you're going to help me. That's when I heard the sirens approaching. Marcus heard them too, his face going pale as he realized what was happening. You called the police? You threatened my family, Marcus. That was a mistake. As the police knocked on Emma's door, I watched Marcus Wellington's carefully constructed world finally crumble completely. The man who had humiliated me in front of everyone I knew was about to learn what real humiliation felt like. But this was just the beginning of his fall. The police arrested Marcus on charges of harassment and making threats. As they led him away in handcuffs, he kept shouting about how I was going to regret this, how he had connections that would destroy me. The neighbors came out of their apartments to watch the spectacle, and I couldn't help but think about how the tables had turned since that night at Romano's. Emma sat on her couch afterward, still shaken by what had happened. I made her a cup of tea and sat down beside her, knowing I owed her an explanation. Dad, I don't understand any of this. Who is that man, and why was he asking about your finances? I took a deep breath. For 24 years, since the day Emma was born, I had been protecting her from the complexities of my business life. But she was 24 now, old enough to understand the truth. Emma, there are some things about my life that I've never told you, things I thought would be better left private. What kind of things? I pulled out my phone and showed her the same document I had shown Sandra. Emma read it twice, her eyes growing wider with each number. Dad, this says you're worth $25 million. That's right. But we've always lived so simply. When I was growing up, you always said we had to be careful with money. We did have to be careful, but not because we didn't have it. I wanted you to grow up understanding the value of hard work and humility. I wanted you to know that happiness doesn't come from money. Emma set down the paper and looked at me with new eyes. Sandra didn't know about this either, did she? Not until yesterday. And that's why she wants you back now. The pain in my daughter's voice broke my heart. She was putting the pieces together, understanding that Sandra's sudden change of heart wasn't about love. Emma, I need you to know that everything I did because I believed it was right. I never wanted to deceive anyone, but I also didn't want to be loved for the wrong reasons. She nodded slowly. That's why you let everyone think you were just a construction worker. I am a construction worker. That's who I've always been, regardless of how much money I have. Over the next few days, word spread quickly through our small social circle about Marcus's arrest. The story grew with each telling, and by the end of the week, everyone knew that Marcus Wellington wasn't the successful businessman he had pretended to be. Sandra called me repeatedly, begging for a chance to explain herself, but I had heard enough explanations. Instead, I focused on the legal proceedings. The divorce was moving forward smoothly, and Marcus's criminal charges meant he was in no position to cause more trouble. The real reckoning came the following week when Sandra's carefully constructed life began to fall apart piece by piece. Without my financial support, which she had never known existed, the bills started piling up. The house payments, which had been automatically deducted from one of my business accounts, stopped. Her credit cards, which had been backed by my assets, were canceled. Margaret called me on a Thursday morning, her voice a mixture of anger and desperation. Felix, you have to help Sandra. She's in real trouble. What kind of trouble? Financial trouble. She can't make the house payments, her car is being repossessed, and she has no money for groceries. She's been staying with us for the past week, and honestly, we can't afford to support her either. I felt no satisfaction in Sandra's suffering, but I also felt no obligation to fix it. Sandra made her choice. She chose to leave me for a man she thought had more money. Now she has to live with the consequences. But she didn't know about your money. If she had known, none of this would have happened. That's exactly the point. She should have loved me regardless of how much money I had. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Felix, I know Sandra hurt you, but she's family. Doesn't that mean anything? Family means loyalty, respect, and love that isn't conditional on bank account balances. Sandra showed me very clearly that I wasn't family to her. The conversation that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Sandra's father, Robert, called me on Friday evening. He was a man I had always respected, a retired teacher who had worked 2 jobs to put Sandra through college. "Felix, I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything, Robert." "Yes, I do. I laughed at you that night at the restaurant. I thought Sandra was smart to find someone who could provide better for her. I was wrong." His voice was heavy with shame, and I found myself feeling sorry for him. "Robert, you were supporting your daughter. I understand that. No, I was supporting her selfishness. I raised her to believe that money was more important than character, and I'm ashamed of that. When I think about how you worked to support our family all these years, how you never complained or asked for recognition, I realize what kind of man you really are." "What do you mean, supported your family?" There was a long pause. "Felix, didn't you know? The money Sandra sent us every month to help with my medical bills, the loan that paid off our mortgage, the fund that paid for Sandra's mother's cancer treatments. Sandra always said it came from her work, but we know now that she never made that kind of money." My throat tightened as I realized the full scope of what had been happening. Sandra had been taking credit for my generosity, letting her family believe she was the successful one supporting them. "Robert, I want you to know that I never expected recognition for any of that. I was happy to help. We were happy to receive it, but we should have known the truth. Sandra let us believe she was this successful, generous daughter when really she was just passing along your kindness." After I hung up with Robert, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about the strange turns life takes. I had spent years supporting people who didn't even know I existed, while being looked down upon by the very people who benefited from my hard work. The final piece of justice came from an unexpected quarter. James called me the following Monday with news about Marcus. "Felix, you're going to want to hear this. Marcus's creditors have moved against him. The bankruptcy filing went through over the weekend. All of his businesses, everything, the dealerships, his house, even his personal assets. Apparently, he'd been using investor money for personal expenses for months. There's going to be a criminal investigation into possible fraud charges. What about the people who invested with him? That's the interesting part. Most of his investors were people from your social circle. Sandra's friends, neighbors, people who were at the restaurant that night. Apparently, Marcus had been using his relationship with Sandra to gain access to potential investors. The irony was complete. Marcus had targeted Sandra to get to me, but he had also been using her connections to scam other people. Everyone who had laughed at me that night at Romano's had been potential victims of Marcus's schemes. "There's something else," James continued. "Sandra's been trying to contact Marcus's victims, offering to help them recover their losses. She's been telling people that she was a victim too, that she had no idea what Marcus was really doing. Is that true? Legally, probably, but morally, she introduced Marcus to most of these people. She vouched for him, encouraged them to trust him. Whether she knew he was a fraud or not, she bears some responsibility. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Emma and asked her to meet me for dinner. When she arrived at the restaurant, she looked nervous. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Emma, I want to talk to you about your future. You're 24 years old, you have a college degree, and you're working at a job that doesn't challenge you. I like my job. But is it what you want to do with your life?" She hesitated. "I've always wanted to start my own business, maybe something in graphic design. But it takes money to start a business, and I can't ask you to support me when you're already dealing with so much." I smiled and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check for $100,000. "Dad, I can't accept this." "Emma, you are my daughter. My real daughter, who loved me when you thought I was poor and who still loves me now that you know I'm not. This isn't charity. This is an investment in someone I believe in." Tears filled her eyes as she looked at the check. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything, but I have one condition." "What's that?" "Promise me you'll build your business based on hard work and integrity, not on how much money your father has." "I promise." As we left the restaurant that night, Emma hugged me tighter than she had since she was a little girl. For the first time in months, I felt truly happy. I had lost a wife who never really loved me, but I had gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I had raised a daughter who understood what really mattered. The divorce papers were finalized the following week. Sandra got nothing beyond what she had brought into the marriage, which wasn't much. The prenup I had insisted on 8 years earlier protected my assets completely, but more importantly, I had protected something more valuable than money. I had protected my integrity, my self-respect, and my relationship with the one person who had always loved me for who I was, not what I had. Sandra's world had crumbled, but mine was just beginning to rebuild itself on a foundation of truth. 6 months after that terrible birthday dinner at Romano's, I stood in the doorway of my new home, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and amber. The house was smaller than the one I had shared with Sandra, but it was mine in every sense of the word. Every piece of furniture, every photograph on the walls, every book on the shelves reflected who I really was, not who I had pretended to be for 8 years. The move to Colorado had been Emma's idea. "Dad," she had said one evening as we walked through her thriving graphic design studio, "you've spent your whole life building things for other people. Why don't you build something for yourself?" She was right. At 59, I had enough money to live comfortably anywhere I wanted. More importantly, I had learned the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich was having money. Wealthy was having the freedom to choose how to spend your time. I chose to spend mine in the mountains, in a place where the air was clean and the pace of life allowed for reflection. I kept Morrison Construction, but I hired a manager to run the day-to-day operations. My role became what it should have always been, the owner who provided vision and guidance, not the man who felt obligated to prove his worth with dirty hands and aching muscles. The phone rang, interrupting my morning meditation. It was James calling with his weekly update on the aftermath of my former life. "Felix, I thought you should know. Sandra's bankruptcy filing was approved yesterday." I poured myself a cup of coffee and settled into my favorite chair. "How's she doing?" "About as well as you'd expect. She's living with her parents now, working at a retail job in the mall. Margaret tells people that Sandra is rebuilding her life, but from what I hear, she's struggling with the reality that her choices have consequences." "And Marcus?" "Sentenced to 3 years for fraud. He'll probably serve 18 months. Most of his victims will never recover their full investments, but at least he won't be able to hurt anyone else for a while." After hanging up with James, I walked out onto my deck and breathed in the mountain air. I felt no satisfaction in Sandra's suffering or Marcus's imprisonment. What I felt was something deeper and more valuable: peace. The people who had laughed at me that night at Romano's had learned hard lessons about character and judgment. But I had learned something more important. I had learned to value myself properly. A car pulled into my driveway, and I smiled as I recognized Emma's hybrid SUV. She visited every few weeks, bringing updates about her business and stories about the life she was building. Today, she wasn't alone. A man got out of the passenger side, someone I had met briefly at her studio opening. "Dad, I want you to meet David officially," Emma said as they climbed the steps to my deck. "We've been seeing each other for a few months now." David was a carpenter, a man who worked with his hands and took pride in creating beautiful things. As we shook hands, I noticed the calluses on his palms, the way he looked me directly in the eye, the respect he showed for Emma without trying to overshadow her success. "Mr. Morrison, Emma's told me a lot about you. I understand you're in construction." "I am. What kind of carpentry do you do?" "Custom furniture mostly. I have a small shop in town. It's not much, but it's mine." I liked him immediately, not because he was successful or wealthy, but because he was genuine. He reminded me of myself at his age, before I had learned to hide who I was behind false modesty. "David's helping me design the new office space," Emma said, her eyes bright with happiness. "His work is incredible, Dad. You should see the conference table he's building." As the three of us talked, I realized that Emma had found something I had lost somewhere along the way: the ability to be completely herself with someone she loved. She didn't hide her success, or pretend to be less than she was. David seemed to love her more because of her strength, not despite it. Later that afternoon, after they had gone back to town, I called James with a request that would have surprised the old Felix Morrison. "James, I want to set up a scholarship fund, something for kids from working-class families who want to start their own businesses. How much are you thinking?" $2 million to start. I want to call it the Morrison Foundation for Entrepreneurial Excellence. No income requirements for the families. Just merit-based awards for young people who show real potential and work ethic. That's a significant commitment, Felix. Are you sure? I looked around my house, at the life I had built for myself, at the peace I had found by being honest about who I was. "James, I've spent 30 years accumulating wealth, and the last 6 months learning what to do with it. I want to help people who remind me of myself at 25, hardworking, ambitious, but without the resources to pursue their dreams. I'll start the paperwork." That evening, I received an unexpected phone call. The number was local, but I didn't recognize it. "Mr. Morrison? This is Carol Stevens. I'm Sandra's mother." I tensed, expecting another plea for reconciliation or financial help. "Hello, Carol. I wanted to call and thank you." "Thank me? For not destroying Sandra completely? I know you could have." I know you had every right to take everything and leave her with nothing, but you didn't. I sat down heavily, not sure how to respond. Mr. Morrison, I also wanted to apologize. For that night at the restaurant, for the things I said, for the way I treated you. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know that I was wrong. Carol, you don't need to apologize. You were supporting your daughter. No, I was supporting her worst instincts. I raised her to believe that a man's value was measured by his bank account, and I'm ashamed of that. You are a good man, and we lost something precious when we lost you. After she hung up, I sat on my deck for a long time, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. Carol's call hadn't changed anything, but it had reminded me of something important. Forgiveness wasn't about them. It was about me. I forgave Sandra not because she deserved it, but because holding on to anger was like carrying rocks in my backpack while climbing a mountain. It only made the journey harder. A year later, Emma called with news that made me smile. Dad, David proposed. Congratulations, I'm so happy for you both. There's something else. We want to have the wedding here in Colorado at your house. We want you to walk me down the aisle. I would be honored. And Dad, we want to keep it small, just family and real friends, people who love us for who we are. The wedding was everything a celebration should be. 30 people who genuinely cared about Emma and David, surrounded by mountains and clear skies, celebrating love that was based on respect and shared values rather than financial calculation. As I walked Emma down the makeshift aisle in my backyard, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. I had lost a wife who never truly knew me, but I had gained something infinitely more valuable, the knowledge that I was worthy of love exactly as I was. During his speech at the reception, David thanked me for raising a woman who knows her own worth and isn't afraid to demand the respect she deserves. Emma blushed, but she didn't contradict him. Later that evening, as the last guests were leaving, Emma hugged me tightly. Dad, are you happy? I looked around at my home, my mountains, my daughter, and her new husband, and I realized that for the first time in years, the answer was simple. I'm more than happy, Emma. I'm free. Freedom, I had learned, wasn't about having enough money to do whatever you wanted. Freedom was about having the courage to be exactly who you were, regardless of what other people thought about it. At 59, I had finally learned to value myself properly, not because of what I had accumulated, but because of what I had built. A life of integrity, a daughter who loved me, and the peace that comes from knowing that the people in your life choose to be there. Sandra had been right about one thing that night at Romano's. I was going to die working in construction, but she had been wrong about everything else. I wasn't going to die poor or unloved or unappreciated. I was going to die exactly as I had chosen to live, as a man who knew his own worth and didn't need anyone else's permission to be himself. And that, I had discovered, was the most valuable thing a person could own.